The black single father walked out of the interview room with his shoulders heavy. He had just lost a job that could have changed his life. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply turned and walked away, thinking of his son waiting at home. But just as the glass door was about to close behind him, the entire lobby fell silent. A voice rang out, calling his name with unmistakable urgency. Why would a billionaire CEO chase down a man who had just been rejected? The morning light crept through the thin curtains of a small apartment on the third floor of a building that had seen better days. Randy Thompson moved quietly through the narrow kitchen, his body running on the fumes of a night shift that had ended just 2 hours ago. His hands, still carrying the faint smell of industrial cleaning solution, cracked eggs into a pan with practiced precision. At 35, Randy had learned that exhaustion was just another thing a man could get used to. He worked the night shift at Whitmore Enterprises, pushing a mop across marble floors from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. It was honest work. It paid the bills, most of them anyway, and it gave him something no other job could offer, the chance to be home when his son woke up. The bedroom door creaked open and Elijah appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. At 8 years old, the boy was small for his age, with his mother's gentle eyes and his father's quiet strength. He shuffled toward the kitchen table, and Randy heard it, the slight wheeze in his breathing, the familiar whistle that meant his lungs were fighting again. Randy set the plate of eggs in front of his son and reached for the inhaler on the counter. It was merely empty. He shook it, calculating in his head how many more doses it could give before he would need to find the money for a refill. Without insurance, each inhaler cost what he made in 2 nights of work. Elijah took the inhaler without complaint, breathed in the medication, and then looked up at his father with eyes too observant for a child his age. "Dad, are you tired?" Randy forced a smile. "I'm fine, buddy." "Eat your breakfast." But Elijah kept watching him the way he always did, as if he could see through the walls his father built. The boy had been like this ever since his mother died a car accident 4 years ago. One moment, Randy had a wife, a career in customer service at a telecommunications company, a life that made sense. The next moment he was standing in a hospital hallway trying to understand words that didn't fit together. "We did everything we could." After the funeral, Randy had tried to go back to work, but Elijah needed someone to hold him through the nightmares, to sit with him during the asthma attacks that seemed to come more frequently after losing his mother. Randy took leave, then more leave. And when he finally tried to return to the workforce, he discovered that the world had moved on without him. The gap in his resume was a canyon that no explanation could bridge. Customer service positions went to younger candidates, fresher faces, people without 4 years of grief written into the lines around their eyes. So Randy took what he could get, night janitor at a building where he once might have worked in a corner office. It was a step down, several steps down, but it let him be the father Elijah needed. Elijah finished his eggs and slid off his chair. Before heading to get dressed for school, he stopped by his father's side and slipped something into the pocket of Randy's just-worn jacket hanging by the door. Randy pretended not to notice. This was their ritual, Elijah's little notes, scribbled on scraps of paper, hidden where his father would find them later. Randy never read them right away. He saved them for the moments when the weight of the world pressed too hard, when he needed a reminder of why he kept going. An hour later, Randy walked Elijah to school, holding his small hand as they navigated the crowded sidewalks. At the gate, Elijah hugged him tight. "Have a good sleep, Dad." Randy kissed the top of his son's head. "Have a good day, buddy. I'll pick you up this afternoon." He watched Elijah disappear through the school doors, then turned and walked home, his feet heavy with the exhaustion he had hidden from his son. That evening, Randy clocked in for his shift at Whitmore Enterprises. The building was a tower of glass and steel, home to one of the most successful financial services companies in the country. During the day, it buzzed with executives in tailored suits, analysts staring at multiple screens, assistants rushing between meetings. At night, it belonged to people like Randy, the invisible ones who made sure. The marble floors gleamed and the trash bins were empty by morning. He was mopping the hallway on the 12th floor when he saw it. A notice pinned to the bulletin board near the break room. Customer service specialist. Day shift. Full benefits, including health insurance. He read the words 3 times. Day shift, that meant he could drop Elijah off at school and pick him up in the afternoon. Full benefits, that meant insurance. Real insurance. The kind that would cover Elijah's inhalers, his doctor visits, the emergency room trips that came without warning. Randy stood there, mop in hand, staring at the notice as if it might disappear. He had done this job before, customer service. He had been good at it. Better than good. He knew how to listen, how to calm an angry caller, how to solve problems that others had given up on. That skill hadn't left him, even if the world had decided it no longer counted. But applying meant exposing himself. It meant sitting across from people who would look at his resume and see the gap, the years of pushing a mop instead of building a career. It meant answering questions he had learned to avoid. Why did you leave your previous job? What have you been doing for the past 4 years? Why should we take a chance on you? Randy turned away from the bulletin board. He pushed his mop down the hallway, trying to convince himself that it wasn't worth the risk. He had stability now. Not much, but enough. Why trade that for the humiliation of rejection? But the notice stayed in his mind. It followed him through the rest of his shift, through the floors he cleaned and the trash he emptied. It was still there when he clocked out at 6 in the morning and walked home through streets just beginning to fill with people heading to their own jobs. Back in the apartment, Elijah was still asleep. Randy sat down at the old computer in the corner of the living room, the one he had bought secondhand 3 years ago. He opened a browser and found the job listing on the company website. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He thought about Elijah's inhaler, nearly empty. He thought about the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the ones he shuffled like cards, deciding which could wait another month. He thought about his son asking if he was tired, those knowing eyes seeing too much. Randy reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out the note Elijah had slipped in that morning. He unfolded the crumpled paper and read the words written in a child's uneven handwriting. "Dad, I dreamed you were smiling." Something cracked open in his chest. Randy stared at those words for a long time, feeling the weight of them, the hope buried inside them. When was the last time Elijah had seen him smile? Really smile? When was the last time Randy had given his son something to dream about other than survival? He turned back to the computer. His hands were steady as he filled out the application, typing answers to questions that felt like confessions. He wrote about his experience, his skills, the 4 years he had spent doing whatever it took to keep his family together. When he reached the section asking about his current employment, he wrote the truth: night janitor, Whitmore Enterprises. His finger hovered over the submit button. One click and there was no taking it back. One click, and he would be asking the world to see him as something more than a man with a mop. Randy thought about his son asleep in the next room. He thought about the dreams Elijah had, dreams where his father was smiling. He clicked submit. 3 days after submitting his application, Randy received an email. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words. "We would like to invite you for an interview." The date was set for the following Monday at 2 in the afternoon. On Monday morning, Randy stood in front of the bathroom mirror wearing a suit he had borrowed from Mr. Patterson, the retired postal worker who lived 2 floors down. The jacket was slightly too big in the shoulders, and the pants needed a belt pulled tight to stay up, but it was the best he could do. He adjusted his tie, the only piece of clothing in the outfit that actually belonged to him, a gift from his wife on their 3rd anniversary. Elijah appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, watching his father with curious eyes. "Dad, where are you going? You look fancy." "I'm going to a job interview, buddy." "A new job?" Elijah's eyebrows lifted. "Is it better than your old job?" Randy considered how to answer. "If I get it, I'll be working during the day instead of at night. That means I can be home with you every evening." And he hesitated, not wanting to make promises he might not be able to keep. "You will be able to see the doctor whenever you need to, without us worrying about money." Elijah's face shifted into something that looked almost like hope. "So you have to get it." "Dad, I'm going to try my best." Elijah disappeared into his room and returned a moment later with a small piece of paper folded into a square. He tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of his father's borrowed jacket, right over his heart. Randy smiled. "What does this one say?" "You can't read it until later," Elijah said firmly. "That's the rule." "Okay, buddy. That's the rule." The interview was held in a conference room on the 15th floor of Whitmore Enterprises, 3 floors above where Randy spent his nights mopping hallways. 3 people sat across the conference table from him. The man in the center was Richard Cole, the head of human resources, in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. To his left sat Sandra Mills, the customer service manager, a practical-looking woman who flipped through Randy's resume with what appeared to be genuine interest. On the right was Derek Hoffman, a young HR associate who seemed more focused on his tablet than on the candidate in front of him. The interview began well. Sandra led the questioning, asking about Randy's approach to handling difficult customers, his experience with conflict resolution, his ability to work under pressure. These were questions Randy knew how to answer. He spoke about his years at the telecommunications company, the techniques he had developed for de-escalating tense situations, the satisfaction he found in turning an angry caller into a loyal customer. Sandra nodded as he spoke, occasionally making notes. Your experience is impressive, Mr. Thompson. We don't often see candidates with such a strong background in customer relations. Randy allowed himself a small breath of hope. Then Richard Cole leaned forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mr. Thompson, I'd like to discuss something that stands out in your application. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes had the sharpness of a man preparing to dissect something. You mentioned that you're currently employed here at Whitmore Enterprises in the custodial department. Can you help me understand how someone with your background ended up in that role? Randy had prepared for this question. He had rehearsed the words 100 times. But sitting here under the fluorescent lights and the weight of Richard Cole's gaze, the rehearsed answer felt hollow. He told the truth instead. My wife passed away 4 years ago. Our son was 4 at the time. He needed me. Taking care of him became my priority. And when I was ready to return to work, the job market had moved on. Custodial work offered flexibility. I could work nights and still be there for my son during the day. Sandra's expression softened. Derek Hoffman looked up from his tablet for the first time, but Richard Cole's face remained unchanged. I see. And your son, he's still in the picture, still requiring this flexibility? Randy felt something tighten in his chest. My son is 8 years old. He has chronic asthma. He needs regular medical care and a parent who can be there for him. Richard Cole nodded slowly, as if processing this information. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your candor, but I have to ask, do you believe your personal circumstances might affect your ability to perform in this role? We have very high standards here. Our culture demands complete dedication. The word culture hung in the air between them. Randy had heard it before, the polite code word that meant he didn't fit, didn't belong, wasn't the right type. Randy understood then. The interview was over. It had been over the moment Richard Cole saw his current job title. Everything since then had been theater, a performance of fairness before an inevitable rejection. He had a choice. He could continue to play along, to answer questions designed to disqualify him, to watch them document reasons that had nothing to do with his ability and everything to do with their assumptions. Or he could leave with the only thing they couldn't take from him, his dignity. Randy stood up. I think I have my answer. Richard Cole blinked. We haven't finished the interview, Mr. Thompson. Yes, Randy said quietly. We have. Thank you for your time. He turned and walked out of the conference room, his back straight, his steps measured. The lobby of Whitmore Enterprises was a cathedral of marble and glass. Randy had cleaned these floors more times than he could count, had polished the brass fixtures until they gleamed, had emptied the trash bins hidden discreetly behind decorative panels. Now, in the middle of the afternoon, the lobby was alive with people. Executives crossed the marble floor with purpose in their stride. Visitors checked in at the reception desk. None of them noticed the man in the borrowed suit walking toward the exit. Randy was almost at the glass doors when he heard his name. Randy Thompson. The voice was clear, authoritative, and loud enough to carry across the entire lobby. Randy stopped. He turned around. A woman was moving toward him with urgent purpose. She was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back from a face that carried both elegance and steel. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Randy made in 6 months. People stepped out of her way as she crossed the lobby, not because she pushed them aside, but because her presence commanded space. Randy recognized her from the portraits that hung in the executive corridor, from the company newsletters he sometimes glanced at while emptying recycling bins. Evelyn Whitmore, the founder and CEO, the first black woman to build a billion-dollar financial services company, the name on the building. She stopped in front of him, her eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. You're leaving? It wasn't a question. The interview didn't go as planned. I imagine it didn't. Her gaze shifted briefly to the elevator bank, where Richard Cole and the rest of the interview panel had just emerged, their faces registering surprise at the scene unfolding in the lobby. Walk with me for a moment, Randy hesitated. Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate whatever this is, but I don't need anyone's pity. Good, she said, because I don't have any to give. She turned and walked toward a quiet alcove near the windows, clearly expecting him to follow. Against his better judgment, Randy did. When they were out of earshot of the gathering crowd, Evelyn spoke again. I know who you are, Mr. Thompson. Not from your application. I don't review applications for customer service positions. I know you from something else. 3 months ago. 11 o'clock at night. A young woman sitting alone in this lobby, crying, papers scattered everywhere. Do you remember? The memory surfaced slowly. A night like any other, near the end of his shift. A girl, barely out of college, sitting on one of the leather benches, her bag overturned, documents spilled across the floor. Randy had found her while making his rounds. I remember her, he said slowly. She was an intern. Someone had embarrassed her in front of her whole department, told her she didn't belong here. Evelyn nodded. What did you do? I just helped her pick up her papers. Talked to her for a few minutes. He shrugged. It wasn't anything special. What did you say to her? Randy thought back. She asked me how I dealt with people telling me I didn't belong. I told her that I had heard it plenty of times myself, but I was still here. And that she would be too if she wanted to be. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. I was working late that night. I saw everything from the balcony. I heard what you said to her. Randy didn't know how to respond. That intern is still here, Evelyn continued. She's been promoted twice. Last month, she told me that the only reason she didn't quit that night was because a janitor sat down next to her and reminded her that the people who say you don't belong don't get to decide who you are. Before Randy could respond, Richard Cole appeared at Evelyn's side, slightly out of breath from crossing the lobby. Mrs. Whitmore, is everything all right? This candidate was just leaving. I'm aware. Evelyn's voice was ice. Tell me, Richard, why is he leaving? Richard Cole straightened his tie. We determined that he wasn't the right fit for our company culture. Our culture, Evelyn repeated. The culture I built. Tell me what specifically about Mr. Thompson doesn't fit. Richard Cole's mouth opened and closed. There were concerns about commitment, reliability, given his circumstances. His circumstances, Evelyn said flatly. You mean the fact that he's a single father? Or the fact that he currently works in custodial services? Or perhaps something else about him that you noticed before he even walked into the room? The color drained from Richard Cole's face. Sandra Mills and Derek Hoffman had joined them now, standing at an uncertain distance. Mrs. Whitmore, I can assure you that our process was completely Mrs. Mills. Evelyn's gaze shifted. How did Mr. Thompson perform on the skills-based questions? Sandra swallowed. Excellently. His answers were some of the best I've heard from any candidate this quarter. So the problem wasn't his qualifications. Silence. Evelyn turned back to Randy. Her voice softened, though it lost none of its strength. I know what you're feeling right now. I know you want to walk out of here and never look back. I know that staying feels like surrender, like letting them win. Randy's jaw tightened. You don't know what I'm feeling. I know exactly what you're feeling. Because 30 years ago, I stood in a lobby just like this one, being told that someone like me didn't belong in the rooms where decisions were made. I walked out that day with my dignity intact and my career in ruins. It took me 5 more years to get another chance. She held his gaze. You have a son who's waiting for you to come home. He's depending on you. And right now, you're trying to decide whether your pride is worth more than his future. The words hit Randy like a physical blow. He thought of Elijah sitting in their small apartment, waiting to hear if his father had gotten the job that would change everything. He thought of the inhaler that was almost empty, the doctor's appointments they kept postponing, the bills that multiplied no matter how many hours he worked. He reached into the inside pocket of his borrowed jacket and pulled out the folded note. His hands were unsteady as he opened it. The words were written in Elijah's careful, uneven letters. Dad, no matter what happens, you're number one to me. Randy stared at the paper until the letters blurred. When he looked up, Evelyn was still watching him. I'm not staying for you, he said quietly. I'm staying for him. And for myself, Evelyn nodded once. That's the only reason worth staying for. Randy started his new position on a Monday morning in early October. He arrived 30 minutes before his shift began, wearing his own clothes this time, a button-down shirt and slacks he had purchased with the signing bonus Evelyn had insisted be included in his offer. His desk was on the 12th floor, in the same hallway he had mopped countless times before. Now he walked past those floors as an employee, not a shadow. His colleagues watched him, with a mixture of curiosity and something harder to name. Everyone knew the story or some version of it, the janitor who had confronted the CEO. The interview that had turned into a standoff in the lobby. The man who should have been rejected, but somehow wasn't. The first 2 weeks were a test Randy had expected. He felt the weight of scrutiny in every interaction, the silent question behind every glance. Does he really belong here? He answered not with words, but with work. He arrived early and stayed until his tasks were complete. He studied the company systems, learned the protocols, memorized the scripts that customer service representatives were expected to follow, and then set them aside when the moment required something more human. His first difficult call came on his third day. An elderly woman, confused and frustrated, trying to understand why her account had been frozen. She had been transferred 4 times before reaching Randy. Her voice trembled with the kind of exhaustion that comes from being ignored. Randy listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to offer solutions or defend company policy. He simply let her speak until she had emptied herself of all the frustration she had been carrying. When she finished, he said, "Mrs. Henderson, I'm sorry this happened to you. Let me see what I can do to fix it." 20 minutes later, her account was restored and she had his direct extension in case anything went wrong again. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with him. "You're the first person who actually heard me. The real test came during his 4th week." A major client threatened to terminate their contract after a series of service failures. The account was worth millions. Losing it would mean layoffs, budget cuts, the kind of corporate crisis that ended careers. Richard Cole convened an emergency meeting to discuss who should handle the client. His eyes swept over the room, landing on everyone except Randy. "We need someone with experience. Someone the client will trust." Sandra Mills, who had watched Randy work for nearly a month, spoke up. "I recommend Randy Thompson. He has the best de-escalation skills in this department. I've seen him turn around situations that seemed impossible." Richard Cole's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The weight of what had happened in the lobby hung over them all. Randy got the assignment. The meeting with the client took place in a conference room on the executive floor. The client was an older man, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who had built his success on never being satisfied with less than perfection. He entered the room already furious. Randy didn't defend the company. He didn't make excuses or promises. Instead, he asked a question. "Mr. Harrison, can you tell me exactly what made you feel disrespected?" The question caught the client off guard. For a moment, the anger in his eyes flickered into something else, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of recognition that someone was finally listening. 45 minutes later, the contract was saved. As they shook hands, the client said, "This is the first time I felt like this company actually gives a damn." 3 months after Randy started his new position, he stood by the window of a conference room on the 12th floor. He had just finished leading an orientation session for new hires. Part of his responsibilities as senior customer service specialist, a promotion that had come quietly, without fanfare, simply an email from Sandra Mills recognizing what everyone in the department already knew. Below him, the lobby stretched out in familiar patterns. He could still trace the path he used to walk with his mop and bucket. The corners where dust gathered, the brass fixtures that needed polishing every other night. That man felt distant now, though Randy knew he would never fully leave him behind. That man had survived. This man was learning to live. His phone buzzed. A message from Elijah's school. "Elijah wanted us to tell you he got the highest score in his class on today's math test. He's very excited to show you." Randy smiled, a real smile, the kind Elijah used to dream about. That evening, Randy and Elijah sat on the worn couch in their small apartment. A pizza box lay open on the coffee table, half empty, evidence of a celebration that didn't need to be fancy to feel complete. The television played a cartoon that Elijah had seen a dozen times, but the boy wasn't really watching. He was leaning against his father's side, his breathing easy and clear. The new inhaler sat in Elijah's jacket pocket, fully covered by insurance, refilled without a second thought about the cost. Elijah looked up at his father. "Dad, are you happy now?" Randy thought about the question, the same question his son had asked weeks ago. This time the answer came without hesitation. "Yeah, buddy. I think I am." Elijah smiled and nestled closer. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise. But inside the apartment, there was only this father and son together in a moment that asked for nothing more than presence. Randy had learned something in these past months. Sometimes the thing that saves a person isn't a grand opportunity or a sudden stroke of luck. Sometimes it's simply being seen, truly seen, by someone who recognizes your worth when the world has decided to look away. And sometimes that someone is an 8-year-old boy who never stopped believing his father was a hero.